welcome back. Today we're going to be going over some more complex patterns of inheritance. We're going to go through dihybrid crosses, then incomplete codominance, as well as blood types. So a little bit more complex than the last monohybrids that we've practiced. So just a review of what we've done before. Last time we talked about monohybrid crosses. Now, monohybrid crosses, we're looking at one specific trait. Remember, mono means one. And in that cross, we looked at what is the chance that an organism is going to inherit one trait. So flower color or seed color or height. It was just looking at the probability of an organism having one trait. And what we're going to do today is expand that a little bit. And we're going to talk about dihybrid crosses, in which we look at what's the chance of an organism inheriting these two traits together. So a dihybrid cross, remember, di means two. A dihybrid cross is going to look at the chance of inheriting two characteristics together. So in a monohybrid cross, we would say, what's the chance of the seed being green? In a dihybrid cross, we're going to look at what's the chance of the seed being green and wrinkled. So what's the chance of getting those two traits together at the same time? Now remember, going back to some of the basic laws that Mendel discussed, all genes are inherited independently of one another. So your eyes aren't blue because your hair is brown. You have a chance of having brown hair, but you also have another chance of having blue eyes. They're not meshed together. Each one has its own separate probability. Therefore, a dihybrid cross has to take that into consideration. So in a dihybrid cross, which is what we're going to start with today, we're looking at what's the chance of inheriting two traits together at the same time, knowing that we get each trait independently. So we're going to continue working with these peas, the pea plants that we've been talking about, because that was Mendel's choice of plant to work with, were the pea plant. So we're going to continue working with some peas here. So first we're going to look at the traits that we're talking about. So a round yellow pea was crossed with a wrinkled green pea. This again is going to be the pure cross. So a pure round yellow pea is crossed with a pure wrinkled green pea. That cross created all round yellow peas. So because all of the peas in result were round and yellow, that's going to help us figure out what's dominant and recessive. Because round covers up wrinkled, the round is going to be dominant. And because the yellow covered up the green, the yellow is dominant for color. Now, when we're looking at dihybrid crosses, we're going through all the same steps. So you're going to want to create a key. Now, keys are going to be very similar, except now we're making a key, one for color and one for texture. So if I'm looking at color, I'm going to use a capital Y to represent yellow. And I'm going to use a lowercase y to represent green. That is a Y, not a G. Let me see if I can make that a bit more clear so you don't think that's a Y. There we go, little Y. And let's say for texture, I'm going to use a big R to represent round, and a little r to represent wrinkled. So that's how you would make your key. You make it for each of the two separate traits, and then we're going to combine them here in a second. So again, this initial cross, it crossed a homozygous round, homozygous yellow. So homozygous for round, just practicing. Remember that prefix homo means same. And we said that our letter that we're going to use for round is big R. So homozygous round would be big R, big R. That plant is also homozygous yellow. Homo means same. Yellow, we said, is going to be big Y. So two of the same big Y's would be big Y, big Y. So this would be parent 1 because parent 1 is going to be round and yellow, and it's homozygous for both. Now this is a little bit different in a dihybrid because, again, we're looking at two traits at the same time, meaning here's trait 1 and here's trait 2. So the R's are trait 1, the Y's are trait 2. Now, parent 2, let's figure out parent 2. Parent 2 is homozygous, wrinkled. Remember, homozygous is two of the same, because homo means same. And wrinkled, we said wrinkled is going to be little r, so two of the same little r's. That parent is also homozygous green. Homozygous, again, means same, which is two of the same letter, and we said that green is going to be little y. So parent 2 is going to be little r, little y, little y. Again, little r for wrinkled, little y for green. All the offspring from that cross happen to be all round and yellow, like we see in the image over here. And conveniently, we can go ahead and figure out the genotype of those offspring. So we know that parent 1 is going to give one R. The only R it has to give is a big R. Parent 2 is also going to give an R, but it can only give a small one. Parent 1 has to give a Y. It's going to give one Y. And parent 2 is going to give a Y, and so it's going to be a little y. So I can kind of figure that one out without doing any work at all because I know that each parent gives one letter, one of each letter. Parent 1 can only give a big R, and parent 2 can only give a little r. Therefore, I know that the baby's going to be big, little. I also know that each parent is going to give a Y, and because they're homozygous, we know exactly what type of letter they're going to give. So when we look at the offspring from this next cross, so when we cross two of the round yellows, we get an interesting mix. We have 9 that are round and yellow. We have 3 that are going to be round and green. 3 are going to be wrinkled and yellow. And 1 is going to be wrinkled and green. So note, this is going to be a much larger cross. So our box is not going to be one of the ones with 4 squares. This is going to have 16 squares, our cross. And it brings us to a new ratio. When we cross two fully heterozygous parents, so if I cut this off here, if I was to take a big R, big Y, little y, and cross it with a big R, big Y, little y, I always get 9 completely dominant. I get 3 of the intermediates and 1 that's completely recessive. And we'll look at that here in the one below. We'll draw it out. You can see what it looks like. But anytime 2 completely heterozygous organisms are crossed, it's always going to come out to be a 9:3:3:1 ratio. And if you can't remember that, if that's not just a memory trick you don't want to play, that's fine. As long as you know how to draw them out, you're totally good. So next we're going to look at what this setup actually looks like, so what this dihybrid cross is actually going to look like. So we're going to follow the same steps. So we would have our problem. First, we would figure out our genes, or our key. We did that up here. We already figured out our key. So figuring out your key is step 1. Coming up with the genotypes of the parents, again, was step 2. Draw out your square. We're about to do that here. And then answer your question would be the very last step using what we do here. So The cross that we are going to draw out is going to be the one that we listed right above. We're going to draw out the cross for creating our F2 generation. So these are going to be our parents. And we're going to look at how we would draw out this cross. Now, for the sake of this class, you will not need to be able to figure out how to set up this cross. So for instance, here I'm going to give you the letters across the top and across the side. For this particular class, you won't need to know how to figure those out on your own quite yet, but you will need to know how to put them into the square, so how to figure out the ones in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and tell you how you figure out your gametes, but again, that's not something you need to know. So we have our parents, and we know that our parents are going to pass down, each parent will pass down one R and one Y. Now we have to figure out all the different combinations in R and Ys that each parent could pass down. So I'm going to draw these separately, and we're going to figure out what goes along the top of our box here, because we're figuring out what are all the different combinations that parent one could pass down. Now there's two ways that you can do this. One is easier than the other. So the first way that you can do it is by just simply looking at it and figuring out all the combinations. So here, I know that my parent one here, it's going to pass down an R and a Y. Now it could pass down a big R and a big Y. It could pass down a little r and a big Y, or a big R and a little Y, or a little r and a little Y. So I'm going to do that one more time. And this one is just looking at it and figuring out all the different combinations you could have. So here, I could have a big R being passed down with a big Y, or the parent could pass down a little r with a big Y, or a little r and a little Y, or what's our last one? Let's see, we got big R, big Y, we got little, little, we got big R. Nope, we don't have the big R, little Y. So big R, little Y. So the first one you can do just by looking at it and figuring it out. But there's also a system that's more systematic, and that is known as the FOIL. It's very similar to what you would do in math, except in this case with the letters. So the F stands for first, the first of each letter. So the first R is a big R. The first Y is a big Y. The O stands for the outer letters. So on the outside, I have the big R, and on the outside over here, I have the little Y. The I stands for the letters in the middle. In the middle, I have a little r and a big Y. And then L stands for last. So the last R is the little r, and the last of the Y's is the little Y's. And that'll give you all your combinations. Either way will get you the same answer. So either way will get you the correct setup. Now I'm going to put parent 1 across the top. So parent 1 can pass down a big R and a big Y, or it can pass down a little r and a big Y, or it could pass down a little r and a little Y, or it could pass down a big R and a little Y. So that's parent 1. Now I'm going to do the same for parent 2 along the side. So parent 2 can pass down a big R and a big Y, or a big R and a little Y. I like to curve my Y's, that way I know they're little. Or they could pass down a little r and a big Y, or a little r and a little Y. And that sets up my square. Now again, this will always be given to you, but that's how I figure it out. So if that part did not make sense, just know that part you do not need to figure out all on your own. That will be given to you. So now that we have our setup, I'm going to ignore the rest. Now we're going to look at how we would fill in this square. So the general rule of thumb when you're filling out a dihybrid cross is you want to keep your two letters together. So you want to keep your R's with the R's and the Y's with the Y's. So keep like letters together. So I'll write that over here to the side. Keep like letters together. Big letters are typically written first. And other than that, this is going to work just like a multiplication table. So to fill in my first box right here, I'm going to first drag over my R. So this R would go here for a big R. This R would go here for another big R, and then I'd cross my Y's, my big Y with my big Y. All right, now for my second box here, this big R is going to go here, along with the little R. It's going to go right down. This big Y will come over, and this big Y will come over. For this box, my big R's are coming over. This R is coming down. Big Y comes over with the little y. So again, my R's, big R, and then my little r. My big Y is going to come over next to a little y. You just work on filling this out. So I'm going to go ahead and work on filling it out. These can take a while to fill out. All right. So now that we've done this part, the next step would be figuring out what each of these would look like. Now, in the one that I've given you here on the PowerPoint, it already shows a picture of what it would look like. When actually working one of these, it wouldn't come with a picture, and you would have to figure it out. So you would have to know that big R stands for round, big Y stands for yellow, and you would have to know that this one would be round and yellow. So that's how you would go about answering your question. One piece of advice, I know right now that we don't have a specific question to answer, but typically what I like to do when I'm working one of these is kind of mark off where I've already been. So for instance, if I was trying to figure out the number of round yellows, I would mark them off as I went. So let's go ahead and figure out how many round yellow ones I have. Now I'm going to ignore this picture over here. This one you could just count. It'd be really easy. But when you were working through this one, it's not quite as simple. So if I'm looking for a round yellow, round means it has a big R. It could be only one big R. It could be two big R's. It doesn't matter. It has to have a big R. And yellow means it has a big Y. Now, again, it could be a big Y and a little y would be yellow, or a big Y and a big Y would also be yellow. So I'm looking for any combination, any one of these that has a big R and a big Y. And I'm going to count and mark off at the same time. And I'm going to use a different color. Let's use red to say that I'm already done that one. So here is one big R, big Y. Here's a 2. That one has a big R and a big Y. That one has a big R and a big Y. Big R and a big Y. That one. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I see no more. I have 9 round and yellows. And I would keep doing the same for each one. So if I wanted to figure out how many round greens, I got to figure out round means big R, green means little y, little y. So how many are big R, little y, little y? 1, 2, 3. So I got 3 that have a big R and 2 little y's. All right, now what about wrinkled and yellow? Well, I know that wrinkled means that I have little r, so I'm looking for little r with a big Y. And I have 1, 2, 3. I have 3 of those. And the only last one left, that the combination that I have, is going to be one that is wrinkled and green. Wrinkled again. Wrinkled is going to be little r. Green is little y. I only have 1 of those. So again, when I'm answering my question, I recommend just marking them off so you know where you've been. You know you've already counted that one. Because sometimes if you're just trying to eyeball it and you don't mark it off, you're going to lose place of the ones you've already counted. And you want to be sure that you get them right. So you could mark them off, or you could color code them, whichever works best for you. So that's how you would do a dihybrid cross. Now this is going to bring us back to Mendel's laws of heredity. So I think we talked about this one last time, the law of independent assortment. Mendel's law of independent assortment states that different genes are going to separate into different gametes, and they're going to go there independently. So each specific gene is inherited independently from one another. So just knowing that your genes are not held together, each one is independent, inherited independently. Now, there is only one small exception to that. And that happens if 2 genes are on the same chromosome and they're really, really, really close to one another. So if we looked over here, these 2 genes are inherited on the same chromosome right beside each other. Sometimes, if they are so close, that means crossing over won't happen. They're not going to mix around. Therefore, they're not going to be mixed. They're going to be linked. So typically, if they're very, very close side by side, they're rarely going to be inherited separately because crossing over isn't going to happen. Nope, I spelled that wrong. So they're rarely inherited separately because crossing over isn't going to happen in between them. So rarely inherited separately, or I think the real thing that goes in that blank is they rarely cross over. Therefore, they are called linked. They're going to be linked together, inherited together, because they're right next to each other and they're not going to be split up because they're so close and crossing over can't happen in the middle. And that leaves us with just a quick review before we go into more complex modes of inheritance. So, Mendel's law of segregation. This happens when we're looking at monohybrid crosses. And you notice that each allele is going to separate into a separate gamete. So what that essentially means is that if your parent has 2 letters for a gene, they only give you 1 letter. Their letters separate and they only give you 1. So if a parent has a big A and a little a, you're either getting a big A or a little a because they separate. And then the law of independent assortment states that you get each gene independently. So this is going to be important in a dihybrid cross, or if you keep going on in science, trihybrid cross, any larger crosses looking at more than 2 traits or 2 or more. And it means that each specific gene is inherited separately or independently from others. So this is when genes are inherited independently from other genes. Okay, so that is all about dihybrid crosses. Just because we're getting into some length here, I'm going to go ahead and pause this video, and then I will upload another one on more advanced forms of inheritance.